Welcome to another episode of the Boxless World podcast, where we speak to guests who are redefining their approaches to work and life. Today, we're joined by Simon Gale, who is the chief executive of the charity JustLife and has been so since 2020. JustLife works with people living in temporary accommodation in Brighton, Hove and Manchester. And while influencing practice and policy nationally, their mission is to make people's experience of temporary accommodation short, safe and healthy. Welcome, Simon. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Bud. Really good to be here.
Simon, my first question for you today is, before JustLife became your career, what was it that first made homelessness feel like a personal issue? Rather than a social problem that other people have to take ownership of?
Well, to be honest with you, I think it really became more of a personal issue once I started working at JustLife. Before I worked at JustLife, I had been working in the voluntary and community sector in youth work for a number of years. And homelessness has been something that I'd come across in terms of some of the young people that we've been working with, but not particularly people that were rough sleeping or experiencing temporary accommodation. And I'd done some volunteering working with people experiencing homelessness in my late teens, early 20s, and felt, could see that this is really wrong that people are having to experience homelessness in this day and age, but didn't really feel like there was much I could do about it. And I didn't really get to know anyone that was experiencing it. It was once I started working at JustLife when an opportunity came up just to work one day a week in Brighton when the project was starting in Brighton. And I remember thinking at the time, I don't really know much about homelessness, so what can I bring? But I thought I'd give it a go, and it was very early on, within the first couple of days of my one day a week, of coming across people that were living in Brighton in temporary accommodation that were experiencing homelessness, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, these people are just so much like me. Their lives are very similar. They've had varying careers, varying interests, but a lot of them connected with what I was interested in, whether it was football or music, or working in different fields, different stages. So it soon became. I remember really clearly a couple of the first people that I ever got to know through working at JustLife, which was 14 years ago now, and they're still, in my mind when I'm doing the work at JustLife, even though now it's more of a, I'm in a leadership role and I'm, doing meetings and funding bids and stuff like that. But these people very much in my mind as remembering them and the impact we were able to have on their lives. So I think it really became something I became really passionate about once relationships began really, and I began to meet people that were experiencing homelessness, especially in temporary accommodation, which is something I didn't, for me at the time when I started at JustLife, homelessness had very much been, it's about rough sleeping. But what I've realised now is that that's just the tip of the iceberg, and that beneath that, there's thousands of people experiencing homelessness in temporary accommodation, which can be a good thing. It's a good safety net to have, but very often it's a really can be a destructive experience for people where they move on negatively in their lives rather than moving on positively.
Yeah, I want to dive into that a little bit because the term temporary accommodation sounds reassuring, as though it's a short stop before someone goes into something more permanent. But temporary accommodation in reality, it isn't necessarily always those things. What is the reality of people's experience that for many we don't know about?
Well, at JustLife, our mission is to make people's experience of temporary accommodation short, safe and healthy. And that came about really because through the experience of working with people day in, day out in Brighton and Manchester, and then beginning to have conversations with other parts of the UK, we realised that people's experience definitely wasn't short. It wasn't safe. It wasn't safe, and it wasn't healthy. So we would work with people that have been living in temporary accommodation for years, sometimes coming up to 10 years. We would work with people that were maybe discharged from hospital into homeless temporary accommodation. They may have been in hospital with all sorts of issues, and because of that hospital stay, been made homeless, or because they've been in hospital, couldn't go back to the streets for obvious reasons, but then were placed on the third floor of a block with only stairs, but they've come out with severe mobility issues, maybe didn't have access to a private bathroom, just had shared facilities in big units of accommodation with lots of other people, many of whom may be experiencing poor mental health, substance misuse, and physical health. So yeah, the reality is very different, and I think in the past it could have been seen as organisations obviously actively want to get people off the streets, and the local authority do, and it can be then a bit of a boxes ticked. We've got them off the streets. They've got a roof over their head. And then the reality of what that was like was sort of hidden and unseen, really. So in the UK, well, in England at the moment, we've got the highest levels of people in temporary accommodation we've ever had, over 130,000 households, and that includes over 170,000 children. So that's a couple of Wembleys full of children that are living in England in temporary accommodation, and that can last months or years, and that can be really problematic if children and young people are really trying to live their lives in a very small space when it comes to learning, doing homework, exams, even just general development as a child, having space to run around and play and stuff like that. So yeah, the reality is can be quite negative experience. Not always. Often it can be quick, and it can be a springboard for people to move on positively. And we found that it can be, when people are provided support as well, it can be really help them to move on positively with their lives, find better accommodation, and move on in healthier situations. But often it's I think the hidden's quite a key word. People just get hidden and potentially forgotten about. And
lost
it's obviously
in the system.
Lost in the system. That's right. And it's becoming more of when we started working as an organisation 18 years ago, it wasn't really talked about. We couldn't really find any research about it. It was more of that sort of, oh yeah, we've got them housed, tick. But over time, it's becoming more and more of an issue, partly due to organisations like ourselves raising the issue, but also the fact that because of the way that costs have gone up in terms of accommodation, now local authorities are spending incredible amounts of money on housing people in temporary accommodation, and it's not sustainable for us as a society. So we need to find new solutions for that.
Mm-hmm. This may be obvious to some people, particularly those that are from these cities, but Brighton, London, and Manchester, can you just share a little bit about why the focus is on those three cities?
Yeah, well, the organisation started in Manchester by a couple, Gary and Hannah, and they were living in Openshaw, which is in East Manchester, delivering community work and projects for people. And they started to realise, well, through someone they'd got to know quite well, sadly died in temporary accommodation. And they then started to talk to the people that were also living in temporary accommodation after this guy, Jason's death, and they started to understand a lot of the issues that people were facing, and they couldn't believe it, the poor standards, the exploitation that people were experiencing, and just the way people were left there. So they set up JustLife to try and help these people in sort of 4 or 5 houses in East Manchester to get out. And then they sort of thought that would be it, maybe job done, but then they soon realised people were following them, getting placed in this accommodation, and that wasn't really the accommodation was still going on. So then they started to work with the landlords to try and help them and support them to provide a better service for people, work with the local authority. And then after a few years, Gary and Hannah were from Brighton, so they decided to move back to Brighton with their family. And then they started asking the questions whether there was a need for a Just Life and what temporary accommodation was like in Brighton. So that's come about sort of randomly. But actually, it's been really powerful because we've got two services, one on the south coast in the southeast of England, one in a much bigger city in the northwest. So that gives sort of good comparisons. And then we've been able to do some work in London as well, which is really been working with some of the local authorities. Obviously, London is where the biggest issue with temporary accommodation is in terms of numbers, and also the biggest issue in terms of local authorities placing people outside of their borough into other boroughs or other parts of England. But we've been able to work in London now with 7 or 8 of the local authorities to help them bring together all the stakeholders. So one of the things that we're very passionate about is collaboration, and it's definitely one of my core values in the organisations. And we want to try and make a difference in the lives of people in temporary accommodation, but we realise that we're not going to be able to do that ourselves. So for us, it's really important that we sort of move away from silo working and bring together all the stakeholders. So we run something called temporary accommodation action groups, where we have the local authority, people in the accommodation, providers of the accommodation and the charity sector and the public sector, like healthcare, coming together and having conversations about what are the issues, what are the bits we can join together and say, look, this is an issue for all of us. We might have different motivations here, but there are some specific issues, and how can we work on solutions? So yeah, that's the way it sort of ended up with that sort of model. Where we're not an organisation where our value is talked about collaboration, that we talk about collaboration before competition. And I think we're not particularly interested in growth for the sake of growth. We want to see more impact and more people impacted by the work of Just Life and or whoever's work, but just really reducing the impact that homelessness and temporary accommodation has on people. So we really try and work together as much as possible, whether that's in our projects in Brighton and Manchester with other organisations in the city, whether it's with local politics. So in Brighton and Hove, we've done a lot of work recently with the local authority to look at the homelessness and rough sleeping strategy, which they announced recently, when we were very much involved in that, along with other organisations, and really pulling organisations together to have one voice and make a difference, or whether it's on a national scale as well. So we co-secretariats and help set up something called the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Households in Temporary Accommodation. So it has a range of MPs from different parties that sit on that, and we give various presentations to them, and they discuss different issues around temporary accommodation. So yeah, collaboration before competition is something that's really key for us.
Yeah, it really resonates with me, because I think particularly in traditional business models, it's completely the opposite, right? It's competition before collaboration. But actually, when we're looking as a society at how we can solve societal issues, that's the mentality we need, is collaboration over competition. You've moved through kind of the front line, if you like, when you first started volunteering with the charity, into more operational and organizational leadership. How have you navigated that journey? What have you found easy? What have you found difficult in going into that leadership role and making tough decisions and having to strategize and think about the future? And we know how difficult the third sector is, and how quickly things can change in the third sector. Just share a little bit with us about how it's been for you in that position.
I think there's always tricky decisions that have to be made, and trying to weigh up what's best for the charity versus what's best for the staff team versus what's best for the people that we're trying to support is very hard, because it's very, very hard to deliver a service if there's no funding for that service, or we have funding and then it runs out, and then we have to decide, right, how we're going to have to stop this service. And then that's, you think, well, it's a brilliant service, it really helps people. But I guess the way I try and deal with it or focus is about thinking about innovation, which is another one of our values, and trying to constantly innovate. Because I do think, and this is something that comes from the business world, I'm not no expert, but I've heard people talk about the fact that if we don't innovate, you just end up standing still, or worse still, you just sort of go backwards. And we need constant innovation within the charity sector, because I think it's easy to get into the habit of doing something the way you've always done it, because that's just the way you've done it. And then we might be missing out on new opportunities to help people. We should be learning all the time about what works, what doesn't work, and where we're able to find new opportunities. If there's new funds that become available, it might take us down a slightly different route. It means that if funding runs out for another part of the project, we're sort of counterbalancing it with new projects that are developing. So trying to stay on top of being innovative, I think, is really important. I think just in terms of leading, I've led at all different points and levels within my working career, I guess. And it's just impossible to keep everyone happy all of the time. So trying to find ways to always focus on the needs and the impacts that we're going to have on those that we're trying to support being our main focus, but also really trying to maintain a level of psychological safety and support for the people that we employ and that volunteer with us has been really important. So I think something like, yeah, understanding the how much sort of support and um, care, I guess, that we need to put into people we support has been something that I've learned along the way, and certainly improved in, I hope.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think, I mean, we've had conversations about this previously, and I'm just interested for you to share your take on this, because lived experience or living experience, whichever term you prefer, is crucial to be able to understand better how to create solutions for people in these positions. But there's a real risk, isn't there, when we are trying to gain that lived experience, that we put people in the positions of reliving traumatic experiences, or it feels quite extractive.
Mm.
How have you navigated that in terms of trying to draw out the power of and the value of someone's lived experience without putting them in a position that is potentially traumatic for them to relive something really negative?
Mm. Yeah, this has been a massive learning curve, I think, for myself and the organisation, but also the sector as a whole. Anyone sort of supporting people, I think, is learning, and I think it's been learning really quickly, and it's moved on really positively, I think. I mean, I think back to previous times, we've definitely not done it very well. We've sort of brought people that have been living in temporary accommodation into meetings to talk to, say, local authority or other support agencies to give their experience. But we haven't really been conscious about the fact that, oh, actually they've only just been evicted a week before from one property, and now we've invited the landlords to this meeting, and they're coming face to face with them. And obviously, just being homeless in the first place is going to be a traumatic experience, and people are experiencing that on a daily basis. So we soon realised that actually we were potentially going to be doing more harm than good through not really thinking about it. And essentially, I wouldn't say we were box ticking in terms of we want to do lived experience, so let's just get a person in there. It's more from a point of naivety, I guess, and not really thinking it through. So one of the things we did probably 3 or 4 years ago now was one of our funders who was funding some of our work were asked us what would really help your organization to grow and develop and improve. And I saw that as a great opportunity to bring someone in who could really lead and focus on our living experience involvement work. So we've had a lived experience lead now for probably 3 years, and that's really helped us because they've really challenged us to, you know, go back to the beginning and really look at the impact of involving people with lived experience and how we can mitigate against the chances of people being re-traumatized. Things like one of the very early things was like, right, we need to pay everyone that we work that we involve, that we're using for their lived experience, or we're asking them to be involved because of their experience. And now just pay a flat rate of £15 an hour to anyone, because we, as in terms of our team, we're all paid staff. So it just, and anyone that's coming to one of our meetings with different stakeholders, they're all paid. So now it just brings people with lived experience into the room on the same level. We're all paid to be here. We've all got different areas of expertise and experience. So that's been really powerful, and something that we do all the time now. We won't do any lived experience work if we're unable to pay people for their time and their expertise. And certainly thinking about how we do that in a psychologically safe way has been really important. So we will spend a lot of time meeting and talking to people before they get involved in, whether it's a focus group or a workshop or recording a video or whatever it might be, being interviewed, and really talking about, so they can understand the expectations, how the information's being used, what we're going to do with it, etc. And that's, I'd like to think that's really, really helped us to be able to deliver, to involve people with lived experience in our work, and thinking about how we design new bits of work, but in a safe way. And we've then been able to really bring that into other work that we do. So the local authority in Brighton and Hove have recently, with their new strategy, asked us to be involved in bringing people's lived experience to that voice to the whole experience of creating a strategy. And when you look through the strategy now, it really reads like a good strategy where they've really thought about making it trauma informed and psychologically thinking through the words that they use and making it understandable. And that's a lot to do with the feedback that people gave that we have been working with. So that's been really good. We've done a similar thing with national government as well, in terms of the ending national plan for homelessness and rough sleeping. We were one of a couple of groups that coordinated the lived experience involvement and response in that, which involved them writing a forward, which is in the government's homelessness plan. So we've seen some really great opportunities to bring the voice of lived experience into the work we do, and I feel like we've definitely moved on from the naive way we maybe did it at the beginning, but there's still loads for us to learn, and it's something that we're trying to develop all the time. But I certainly think it's really important that it's not done from a box ticking point of view to start with. But the way I think the way we do it, what I've realised is that it's slower and it uses a lot more resource, and we have to recognise that and say, right, well, we need to specifically bring in money so that we can do this well. And we need to specifically have people where it's their job or their role to make sure this happens well, which is, does have an impact on a small organisation like us. But I think it's been really great that we've done that.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things I've admired about JustLife looking outside in. And another thing that I've really admired about JustLife is how explicit you are in the mission to help people and their experiences of temporary accommodation, but also to challenge the system. And I just want to touch on that because I think in the charitable sector, when we have organizations that have a mission, it's very much about frontline work. And whilst that's incredibly important, it's sometimes at the detriment of being able to challenge the system, to fix the system, to eradicate the problem. And I guess my question on this is, how was that identified at JustLife that you needed to be explicit and have a dedicated focus on supporting individuals, but also continually challenge the system to, ensure that at some point things change, things improve so that people aren't having those negative experiences?
I think it came around reasonably early the organisation's been going about 18 years, and probably after 4 years, we set up the Brighton project. And then after about 5 years, we began to, we did a project where we needed to see what we would start to look into. Is there any research or information on the impact of temporary accommodation on people's health and well-being? And so we did a search, but we just couldn't find anything. And then so we started to think, well, there's nothing out there. There's nothing out there that tells us the state of the situation across the country in terms of temporary accommodation or locally. So we carried out a piece of research that we did in partnership with a think tank, IPPR North, and that was the beginning really. Once we did that and we saw actually people in power listen to these sorts of reports, they read them, they respond to them, there's possibility that they could take action and make changes. And so we soon realized that if we could use the experience and the work that we do day in, day out in Brighton and Manchester, we could do more research and then start to campaign and make a difference. And it's just something that's really resonated with us as an organisation, I guess, and become a unique part of who we are really, is that, like you say, we help people because we know people need help and it can make a massive difference in their lives. But if we want to stop people having negative experiences of homelessness and temporary accommodation, then we have to do something bigger to try and change the system. It's delivering, a charity to support people is great, but we need justice to change the system to make it fair for everyone, really. And really interestingly, we just released a report called Lifelines, where we had someone look back at the history of temporary accommodation, and I just sort of assumed that would maybe be back 20 years, 30 years. I was aware of the post-war slum clearances and building new council housing and prefab temporary housing, so I thought maybe it would go back to then. But actually it's gone back almost 200 years to, I think it was 1834, to the poor laws, where they started to create workhouses for people that were destitute. And it sort of tracks different types of temporary accommodation, I guess, since then, and how there's been changes. There's been some really good legislation brought in since the Second World War. Some of it's been world leading in terms of how we can support people experiencing homelessness. But it's really interesting that it shows a lot of the problems are still the same from even back 200 years ago. And a lot of that, what the report says, that it highlights a couple of things that I think are really interesting. One is a sort of an ideology really of like deservingness, who deserves to get support and who doesn't. And that's been in existence since the workhouses, and it's changed over time as to who those people are that deserve to get support when they're homeless and those people that don't deserve to get support. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed and ended, and it needs to be fair for all. And it also highlights the fragmentation of sort of the support and the system, and how it's devolved to local authorities to decide how people are supported and housed. And there's just lots of silos that have come in over the years. Even within government, different departments will have different responsibilities that will impact into homelessness. And there's a lot of and that's been going on for 200 years. So there's some good lessons to be learned. It's really interesting. Yeah, and I'd really recommend it. Just maybe just read the executive summary. It's a long old report, but it's really interesting, and we're hoping that this can help us to sort of give a bit of a foundation to increase our campaigning and say, look, it's not just about throwing loads of money at the situation, which obviously would be brilliant, but we do need, as a society, to look at some of the issues that have been around for a long time, and why homelessness it continues to be an issue, even though we've brought in lots of changes over the years to try and address it. It's a relatively, homelessness in itself, I guess, is quite complex. It covers lots of different areas of people's lives and different departments and who has responsibility. But I don't think they're complex, but they're not impossible to overcome.
No, and there's three things that kind of spark my interest there. One is how long it's been going on for and documented. The second point that you mentioned about who is deserving of support, and then the third one is who's been placed as being responsible for organising solutions. So that's
Mm,
quite fascinating to me.
mm,
Um, I want to ask you one last final question, Simon, which is about your position of leadership within a charity, within third sector. What have you had to learn or even unlearn about success and growth and ambition? Because in other sectors, those things are very similar. But when we move into the third sector, we kind of have to reframe how we think a lot of the time. And I'm just interested in how that's become present for you.
mm. I think um, certainly, I guess maybe when I started at Just Life, I would have had my mind would have thought, wow, we could be setting Just Lifes up all over the country, and we could be helping people everywhere, which I guess is uh, quite a common way of sort of going about delivering services and charity. But I think, and I'm not to say that's not an option or a way for people to go to support people, but I think for me and for Just Life, we've definitely come to the realization that um, there are lots of other people and lots of other organizations that can deliver support and work with people that are experiencing homelessness and temporary accommodation already operating across the country. And it doesn't really need us to go in and set up new projects. And we see that a lot within the third sector, either people move into new city and starting up a project, or taking over existing services, bidding for tenders that the council may be giving out. And I think that way you can often lose a lot of the local knowledge and local passion for an issue. So I think we're definitely really in favour of trying to support people in local areas to do the work, rather than having an organisation like us come in and say, we're the experts, this is how you should do it. Because I think, well, as I talked about earlier, we need innovation, and just doing things the way we've always done them, it's obviously not working brilliantly. So we don't want to sort of feed into that. Um, but I think it is really fascinating. And I spoke to a guy the other day at an event who was talking about how even two similar charities or two similar businesses, they might be really aligned on 95% of what they do, but it makes that other 5% sort of more, the difference is disproportionately, um, comes out, and then people make bigger issues over that small 5%, and then it becomes harder to work together. So I think the whole collaborating is just a massive thing that I've learned, and I think it's the way forward in terms of improving the uh, the issues that we see in the country, and that's collaborating. And I think governments, local authorities need to be thinking about how they can collaborate more with charities like ourselves, or the business community, the general public. Um, yeah, so I think probably to answer the question, world domination's off the map now, off the plan now. But just seeing what we can give and what we can bring to improve the system and the situation through collaborating, really.
Yeah, I love that, and I think it's a great message to end on: collaboration over competition. Simon, thanks very much for taking the time today. It's been really interesting to learn more about your approach and the work of Just Life. Keep doing what you're doing, and yeah, you've always got our support. And yeah, I'm sure I'll see you soon. But thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you very much. It's been lovely to chat.
Brilliant. Take care. Thank you very much.
Bye bye.